evening, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jasmine Hartenstein, and I work for the County of San Mateo's Office of Community Affairs Immigrant Services Program.
Hi, everyone. We are so honored to have you all with us today. My name is Jennifer Yamas, and I work with Jasmine for the County of San Mateo's Immigrant Services Program.
We'd like to welcome you and thank you for participating in today's event, as well as acknowledge that we're taking part in a national effort to celebrate Welcoming Week 2021 and our diverse populations and immigrant residents who live and work not only in San Mateo County, but in our nation.
San Mateo County joins hundreds of efforts across the country to recognize immigrant contributions, share a vision of inclusion and belonging, and reaffirm our commitment to better serving our immigrant community. This will be our fourth time hosting the Immigrant Engagement Summit, second time virtually, first time using webinar, so please bear with us as we navigate the technological world that is Zoom. Every year, Welcoming Week unveils a different theme, and this year's theme is Belonging Begins with Us. Well, what does that mean? This Welcoming Week, let's declare that belonging begins with us, that each and every one of us has the power to help others, regardless of their background, to feel like they are seen, embraced, welcomed, and included in our communities.
And so before we really get started, we'd like to kick off this event. We'd like to share a special message from Alex Padilla, U.S. Senator for California.
Hi, I'm Senator Alex Padilla, and I have the honor of representing California in the United States Senate. I want to thank you for inviting me to join you as you work to welcome and engage immigrants across San Mateo County. In America, immigrants have always been essential. Immigrants have fought for our country in every major conflict since the Revolutionary War. Immigrants have created jobs, designed critical innovations, advocated for justice, and built strong communities. And for the last year and a half, immigrants have served on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic as doctors, nurses, teachers, farm workers, custodial staff, and workers in every essential industry. Immigrants have helped to see our country through one of its greatest challenges. That's why I'm working in the U.S. Senate to reform our immigration system, to promote justice, protect dignity, and better reflect the needs of our country. No state is home to more immigrants than California. And here in San Mateo County, more than 1 in 3 residents was born in another country. That diversity strengthens our communities. Together, we can uphold California's tradition of welcoming new Americans. As the proud son of immigrants, this mission is personal to me. Like so many others, my mom and dad came here to make a better life. They arrived in California from different parts of Mexico in the 1960s. They came with a belief in the promise of the American dream, that no matter where you're from, if you work hard, you can contribute to your community and build a better future for yourself and for your children. My parents worked tirelessly for 40 years to realize that dream. My dad as a short order cook, and my mom as a housekeeper. After nearly 30 years, they became American citizens. So I know firsthand the value that immigrants bring to our country. And here in San Mateo, you are affirming that value by highlighting the contributions and needs of this community's immigrants, by thinking hard about opportunities to increase equity, and by preparing to welcome Afghan refugees. I'm proud to partner with agencies throughout our state as we coordinate resources for refugee resettlement. Immigrants are the strength and the heart of the American story. And I'm thankful for the work that you do to show that creating a sense of belonging begins with us. Together, we will build our nation's next chapter.
Thank you, and a huge shout out to Zara and her team for helping us get that video from the senator. Before we go through the program, there's a few things we'd like to mention. We'd like to start by acknowledging that today is Yom Kippur, and we know that many were unable to be here with us today. So we would like to let everyone know that this video will be recorded and posted on our website following the event. Please feel free to send questions to the chat box and or message our team privately. Any questions and comments you'd like to make. We will have Q&A after each session. We do understand that this is a packed 2-hour session, so please take a break if you need to.
An email with the program for the day and the speaker bios. Our first session, Shaping the Future with Data, is a deep research dive into San Mateo County's immigrant community that will help us all better support our immigrant residents. This session will be presented by Welcoming America and New American Economy, and it includes the launch of our Gateways for Growth research report. Our San Mateo County Poet Laureate will then read a beautiful poem about belonging that will precede our second session, The Stories Behind the Numbers. This session will highlight 3 immigrant residents in San Mateo County to hear directly about the impact being welcomed and included produces, and we will all learn how we can strive to create a more inclusive community. Our last session, Inclusion, Belonging, and Equity, will be presented by San Mateo County's Chief Equity Officer, and it will underscore how the county's equity framework includes immigrants and belonging for all. Each of these sessions will be followed by a Q&A portion if time permits. So please chat your questions into the chat box and we'll get to as many as we can.
Lastly, we'd like to acknowledge some of our special guests that are here today with us. Welcome Zara Haji, Bay Area Field Representative for the Office of U.S. Senator Alex Padilla, and a special thanks for her and her team getting that video to us for today. We also have Elmer Martinez, District Representative for Assembly Member Kevin Mullen, Amarance Lee, City Councilwoman for the City of San Mateo, San Mateo County Deputy County Managers Peggy Jensen and Ileana Rodriguez, and last but not least, our County Manager, Mr. Mike Callaghy. Thank you all for being here today. Like Jen mentioned, over the last couple of months, we've been participating in Welcoming America's Belonging Begins With Us campaign. We've highlighted ways communities can reach out to neighbors, coworkers, classmates, and others to create a sense of belonging. We've asked community members to share their stories of belonging with us as well. And to kick off this event, we wanted to share just one submission to set the stage. This comes from community member Way in Foster City. In many cases, it is difficult to find a sense of belonging in a foreign country. Unfamiliar languages and people, strangeness from life to spirit will bring us loneliness. This continues until one day you regard it as your home. I am a Chinese person, and the meaning of home is actually a sense of belonging. It's not only just a physical house, but also not just you, but you and your family living in it. It's the feeling of settlement of life and spirit. Where did this feeling come from? How did it come about? Maybe from a smile. When I walked past the corner, strange passersby met and gave me a smile. Time and time again, this simple, friendly smile, without any doubt, made me accustomed to seeing every stranger around me and smiling. The smile indicates that we are all living in this area and that we are kind to the environment and the people. Maybe it's driving through every intersection, friendly courtesy and smiles and gestures to passersby passing by. I like this kind of friendliness that doesn't ask what is the matter. It puts me at ease and makes me feel at home. So again, special thanks to all that are here today, and Alex Padilla's U.S. Senator for California, the video that he shared with us. Now, as we have provided all attendees with a program and speaker bios, we're going to keep the introductions brief. So I would like to introduce Mo and George. Mo Kantner is the Director of State and Local Initiatives at the New American Economy, and George Zavala is the Western Regional Manager at Welcoming America. We've had the absolute pleasure and honor to work with these two over the last 9 months, and so very excited to have them here with us today. Welcome, Mo and George.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I am hopefully sharing my screen with you all, trying to make sure you guys aren't on the notes screen, but I think we're good. Okay, well, so thank you everyone for that really kind introduction. And thank you, Jasmine, Jennifer, for all of your hard work on this project and on this topic. I know there is a lot happening in the world right now. And so I just want to also thank everyone who is in attendance today. Your presence here is really just a testament to how important this issue is And so I want to thank you for, again, your time and attendance. So again, my name is Mo Kantner. I'm the Director of State and Local Initiatives at New American Economy, and I'm joined by my colleague from Welcoming America, George Zavala, and we'll both be around to answer questions after my presentation on either the research report itself or the Gateways for Growth program overall. So I am going to start with a brief overview of NAE, who we are, why you should listen to us, and then give a very brief overview of the Gateways for Growth program before diving into that good stuff, the key findings of the report itself. So let's dive right in. So at New American Economy, we are a bipartisan research and advocacy organization that looks to change the narrative around immigrants in America. And so we were started about 10 years ago, and in our work, we use original research to quantify exactly how immigrants are an asset at every level of our economy and at every level in our community. And then we use that narrative to bring together leadership across cities, states, and the business community. So our state and local initiatives, we've been around for about 8 years at this point, and we were really born after comprehensive immigration reform fell apart at the federal level. And we saw this real desire from state and local leaders to be more proactive in approaching immigration within their own communities. So we work in over 100 communities across the country, from cities as diverse as Grand Forks, North Dakota, to Dallas, Texas, from San Diego to Portland, Maine, and everywhere in between. And then one of the ways that we support local communities is through the Gateways for Growth Challenge. So this is a competitive challenge that is jointly managed by both New American Economy and Welcoming America. And this program allows communities to apply for support at a couple of different levels. So the first is in a customized research report, and the second is through technical assistance over the course of a year in the creation of a multi-sector immigrant inclusion plan. And so we're really excited that this year San Mateo County was selected to receive both levels of support, the customized research report, which we're releasing today, and the support throughout the year in the creation of this immigrant inclusion plan. And so this year, we are now in our 4th cohort, and there were a total of 19 communities selected, with 10 communities receiving just the research reports and 9 communities receiving both the research report and technical assistance. So San Mateo County is part of a really select group, and we're really, really thrilled to be working with all of you this year. So let's get to the good stuff and see some of the key findings from the report. So just a real quick note that this report encompasses the entirety of San Mateo County. And then a note that for our purposes, when we refer to immigrants and foreign born, which we use interchangeably, we refer to anyone that was not born in the US and not to US citizen parents. So that does include immigrants who are naturalized US citizens, those with green cards, those who are on visas, the undocumented, those with DACA, et cetera. So really the whole spectrum of immigrants. So diving right in. So in San Mateo County, immigrants account for 35.2% of the population, which is significantly higher than the California statewide average of 26.7% of the population, which in and of itself is nearly double the national average of the immigrant population at 13.6%. So already we know that immigrants are going to have a huge impact in the county. And we can see that that's continuing as a trend over time. So between 2014 and 2019, the overall San Mateo County population grew by about 1.1%, and the immigrant population grew by about 0.8%. So that means that more than 27% of the overall population growth in the area came from immigrants. And if we look at where immigrants in San Mateo County are coming from, we see that nearly 18.6% of immigrants come from the Philippines, 15.1% come from Mexico, 11.9% from China, 7.3% from El Salvador, and 5.2% from India. So overall, the background of immigrants in San Mateo County is really quite diverse. We don't really see one overwhelming ethnic group kind of dominating this breakdown. And we also know that immigrants in the region are having a real concrete economic impact. So as we can see, immigrants in the region earned $19.1 billion in 2019 alone. That's billion with a B. So from that, over 1.9 billion went to state and local taxes, and more than 4.6 billion went to federal taxes. And that left immigrants with $12.7 billion in spending power, or disposable income, which is money that can be infused back into the local economy when they shop at grocery stores, at retail stores, at restaurants, et cetera. So we see immigrants contributing to a tax base that supports the county's infrastructure with a solid foundation of consumer spending that then can go back into the local economy. And we can also look at trends of educational attainment of immigrants over the age of 25. So immigrants in San Mateo County as a group tend to be slightly less educated than their US born counterparts, with over 45% of immigrants holding a bachelor's degree or higher and 20% holding an advanced degree, but it's very close to on par with their US born counterparts and well above the national average for immigrants at 32% with a bachelor's degree or higher. So we can see how immigrants in San Mateo County can be uniquely positioned to fill workforce gaps at both ends of the skill and education spectrum, from doctors and engineers to agriculture and manufacturing workers and more labor-intensive jobs. And so, as I kind of alluded to a moment ago, immigrants are going to be a really crucial part of any community and economic development strategy for a really simple reason. The US population is getting older. The new 2020 census data shows a continuing decline of birth rates in the US, and by 2065, the median age will be 42. So baby boomers are retiring at really rapid rates, with 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every single day. And so this is leading to major shortages across the country, across sectors, across industries, and really throughout our entire workforce. And immigrants can play a really huge role in counteracting that. So immigrants are more likely to be of working age in San Mateo County, with 78% being of working age versus 59% of their US born counterparts. And people of working age are really critical in ensuring that we have this robust workforce. So despite the volatility of the past year, and especially as we see communities and businesses opening up more as we attempt to come out of this pandemic, they're really facing a very real workforce shortage. And then one sector where for years we've seen a chronic shortage of workers is in the STEM fields. So nationally in 2016, there were 13 STEM job postings published online for every one unemployed STEM worker. But in California in 2015, there were 15 STEM job postings published online for every one unemployed STEM worker. And these jobs have been particularly critical over the course of the past year. I mean, where would we be right now? How would I even be able to give this presentation without IT support over the past year? And when those jobs go unfilled, companies can not only are they unable to expand or grow, but they can't innovate or adapt to these really quickly changing and evolving markets. And again, this is a place where we can see immigrants playing an outsized role. So while 35.2% of the population, immigrants are 43.4% of the employed labor force and 47.6% of STEM workers in the region. So that means that immigrants are really uniquely positioned to fill in some of these key workforce shortages that we're seeing. And we see this kind of reflected in a number of industries that have the highest shares of immigrants in their workforce. So again, keeping in mind that immigrants are 35.2% of the population in San Mateo County, but immigrants are more than 58% of construction workers, 56% of transportation and warehousing workers, 49.6% of hospitality workers, 47% of healthcare and social assistance workers, and 47% of general services workers, which is typically including personal services, so like laundry services, barbershops, nail salons, et cetera. And so what we see is that whether high skilled or lesser skilled, immigrants are really playing a huge role in some of these important jobs that keep San Mateo County going. And importantly, one thing to note is that immigrants living in San Mateo County in 2019 helped create or preserve 12,400 local manufacturing jobs that would have vanished or otherwise moved elsewhere, which again kind of speaks to that broader issue. The companies that can't fill positions, not only can they not expand, but they can have difficulty sustaining at all. And as workers and as taxpayers, we can really see the huge impact that immigrants are also making in supporting federal entitlement programs, which is really critical to note within kind of the context of the fact that nationally, as the population ages, they are going to increasingly be relying on these programs. So in San Mateo County, we note that immigrants contributed more than $1.5 billion to Social Security, more than $493.8 million to Medicare in 2019 alone. And then again, to put this in a little bit more of a national context, immigrants contributed $182 billion more to Medicare than they drew down between 1996 and 2011. But immigrants really they're more than taxpayers and workers, they're also entrepreneurs. And immigrant entrepreneurs are driving growth, both in job creation and in local economic activity. So across the country, we see that immigrants are more likely to be entrepreneurs than their US-born counterparts, and they employ over 8 million Americans and generate over $1.3 trillion in sales. And so between 2005 and 2010, the rate of immigrant entrepreneurs nearly doubled. And even after the recession in 2013, immigrants bounced back as entrepreneurs just as quickly as their US-born counterparts, which could be really telling for us and for our current situation and sort of our post-pandemic strategy. And so in San Mateo County, immigrants accounted for over 44.4% of all entrepreneurs, which makes them much more likely to be an entrepreneur than their US-born counterparts. And they generated over $946.3 million in business income in 2019 alone. So immigrant entrepreneurs are making really significant contributions to the economy, both on the main streets, quote unquote, main streets of San Mateo County, as well as being really heavy hitters of the business world. So across the country, 44% of Fortune 500 companies in 2020 were founded by either an immigrant or the child of an immigrant. And on average, each new American Fortune 500 company employs over 62,000 workers, which is 12.1% more than the average number of workers at non-new American Fortune 500 firms. That's a mouthful, sorry. So we really see immigrant entrepreneurs making a huge impact on both a local and a national scale. And so I also wanted to highlight something that's been a bit unique about this current cohort of Gateways for Growth, which is after a pretty devastating 2020, how do we respond and rebuild a community in a way that's more robust and more equitable than prior to 2020? And so when working through the strategic planning process with the county's team, we really wanted to also understand the role that immigrants have played as essential workers. And again, we see immigrants really punching above their weight. So immigrants accounted for over 58.7% of essential retail trade workers, 56.1% of transportation and warehousing workers, 55.4% of food service workers, 54.3% of essential service workers, which includes things like building cleaning, waste management, and others, and particularly in the pandemic, when disinfectant and sanitizing and cleaning requirements were so critical, we see how important those workers really are. And then I don't really need to explain how critical immigrants as 49.5% of healthcare workers were during the middle of a health crisis. So again, we see immigrants stepping up when it comes to our healthcare, when it comes to supporting our food supply chain, when it comes to transporting our goods so that we didn't always have to physically go into stores. And through this, we've really been able to see, what being an essential worker really means. And so before I wrap up, I do want to touch on where we see opportunities for supporting some of our immigrant neighbors. So starting with the undocumented population, we know that they're playing a huge role in the county's economy. So there are over 50,000 undocumented people across San Mateo County, and they earn a combined annual income of over $2.4 billion, with $261.2 million going to federal taxes and $114.9 million going to state and local taxes, and leaving them with more than $2 billion in spending power. So the undocumented population is having a significant impact on the region, but we also know that they're less likely and less able to be able to access federal support programs. But we also know that the undocumented population is of prime working age, with over 90% of undocumented immigrants of working age in the county. And when we break down where they're working, we actually see kind of an interesting difference between where they work and where immigrants across San Mateo County work as a whole. So the most common industry for immigrants as a whole in the county is construction, but the most common industry for the undocumented population to work in is professional services, which accounts for 17.8% of undocumented workers. And when we say professional services, we typically refer to industries with professions that require a degree or a license, such as legal services, accounting, scientific research, et cetera. And then the next most common industries for the undocumented population include hospitality, retail trade, construction, and healthcare and social assistance. So we can see the ways in which the undocumented population is contributing to a really wide variety of industries across the county. And then Before I wrap up, I just want to highlight one final piece in supporting immigrants across the county, and that's through the naturalization process, which is especially timely considering that tomorrow is Citizenship Day across the country. So we find that 58.2% of immigrants in the county have naturalized, but over 39,000 of the foreign-born population are likely eligible to naturalize. And so why is that important? So immigrants who decide to naturalize are typically able to access more opportunities like federal jobs, and they aren't reliant on employer sponsorship. And then they tend to have higher earning potential. So on average, almost 9% higher than their counterparts who do not naturalize. So supporting immigrants through this process can have real value both to the immigrant that receives the resources as well as the economic boost to the county. So I'll wrap it up there. But the overall picture that these data points give is that immigrants play a really important role in the community and in the economy of San Mateo County. They keep the workforce young, they boost the tax base, they enlarge the consumer bases, and they contribute their skills and labor to a number of important industries and key occupations. So I just want to leave you all with a couple of resources. The first is Map the Impact, and it's a tool that we have at New American Economy that provides top-line data on all 435 congressional districts, all 50 states, all 100 largest metro areas, and all 3,000 counties across the country. So the data in the report that I just covered today is much more comprehensive, but this is a great tool if you just want some of that basic top-line data, or you're interested in that top-line data in other places around the country as a comparison. And then the other resource that I'll leave you with is the Gateways for Growth website, which lets you look at all of the former G4G communities, their research briefs, and their published strategic plans. So just encourage everyone to check it out if you're interested in seeing how other communities have approached this work. But I will wrap it up there, and George and I are happy to take any questions, again, either on the research or on the strategic plan process and Gateways for Growth program overall. And thank you very much.
Mo, we did have one question in the chat, and they wanted to know the number of undocumented residents in San Mateo County. They missed that number.
That number was 50,000.
Presented. So we do have another question. What approaches are taken to count undocumented workers?
Yeah, that is a very great question. I will be the first to admit that we have on our staff, we have a research team that does all of the research and has the full methodology. So apologies if I completely butcher the way they would explain it. But the majority of our information comes from the 2019 one-year sample of the American Communities Survey. And so we fully acknowledge that it is likely, if anything, an undercount. We try to take conservative estimates when it comes to the number of immigrants as a whole, as well as undocumented workers. But basically, they take a look at the information and then do a number of things that they can cross out. So those that are naturalized citizens, those that are on employer sponsored visas, a number, like they basically go through a methodology of taking the total information and then using a process of elimination to try and pull out all of those that would be considered documented. And then the population that's left over is how they make the estimates for the undocumented population. But if you're interested, I would be more than happy to connect you with our research team or to direct you to our methodology page on our website.
And we have another question. Does the full report include all of the data sources?
It does. It's all cited. We have all the citations. We have the methodology. We have everything that you can take a look at on the report itself. But again, if you have any more kind of very specific questions like what is the table ID of XYZ that was looked through, let me know and I can, like I said, connect you with our research team because they would have that information.
And to Danny, yes, we will be posting the full research report on our Immigrant Services website. We will drop that link into the chat as well. We currently have information on our Gateways for Growth process, where we're at, partners that we have been working with, and the research report will absolutely be up there as well. Any other questions for Mo and George?
Yeah, I see another question right before that question. What do you see as barriers from UI workers to become naturalized?
Oh, there are a number of barriers. That can be that's a tough question to answer. There are a number of barriers, whether that is accessing the resources that are necessary to actually go through the process, whether that's accessing the legal aid resources that can help someone undergo that process. But there are a number of reasons why. I'm sorry, I'm not being articulate on that front, but there are a number of barriers that I know a number of local communities have tried to overcome to help ensure that folks can get connected to the naturalization process. So I know one big barrier is simply the costs of going through the process. The USCIS fees are in the multiple hundreds of dollars. It's a long program. A lot of times you're able to do it more quickly and efficiently if you have legal aid assistance or legal aid representation, and that is not cheap and hard can be difficult to access as well. So there's no one barrier, I would say, that makes it difficult, but it's a lot of compounding factors that can be impacting that.
Did that help answer your question? I think that was Ruben. Any other questions for Mo and George before we head to the next session? Okay, well, they aren't done with San Mateo County just yet. So if you think of questions later today, later this week, later this month, we will still be working with them through the strategic planning process. So use us as a resource, use them as a resource. And we are, again, so grateful to be part of the Gateways for Growth cohort. The research report will be so helpful for not only the county when we're thinking about policies or programs or resources, but other organizations when reaching out to their residents, organizations when applying for funding from foundations, to really, make our immigrant community a priority and more effectively serving them. So thank you so much, George and Mo. We appreciate you being here. So do we have one? Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started, and I will let Jennifer take over.
Yes, thank you, Jazz. And again, thank you, Mo and Jor, for the very comprehensive presentation. It's so important to hear these numbers, and we know that our attendees appreciate it. So next, I'd like to introduce Eileen. Eileen Castanado is an Academy of Americans Poets Laureate Fellow and the Poet Laureate of San Mateo County, the first Asian American and foreign-born poet appointed to the post. We are honored to have her here with us today to share a poem about belonging. Welcome, Eileen.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning and welcome. I am very honored to join you today to present our crowdsourced community poem on the theme of belonging. I have compiled these from messages sent by members of our community here in San Mateo County, and I wish to thank the following for contributing to this poem. Carrie Adams, Tanya Beat of the Commission on the Status of Women and LGBTQ Commission, Mary Lou Bedolla, Megan Brown, Eva Chen, Hillary Cruz, Commissioner Terry Eshel Barker, Paul Ferricano, Caroline Goodwin, Council Member John Goodwin of Colma, Monica Corda, Vivian Lay of the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County, Tatiana Yilkin, Kevin Madrigal, Jessent Marcelino, Sujatha Marsden, Diane Mumi, Cordelia Noman, San Mateo Council Member Diane Papan, Grace Ann Stewart, Rosie Tejada, Rosemary Ibarra Garcia, and Filoli Historic House and Garden. Special thanks to the Peninsula Family Service for also inspiring this poem. And here is our unified chorus of voices delivering an overarching message of belonging and welcoming. Belonging begins with us. As you walk outside on your first morning here, put out seed and see what comes near. A dove, a rose, a redwood tree, gaze upon a new light, another wonderful adventure, a new welcoming page. Sing songs in your mother tongue, we will play music to it. Like a shooting star in the nighttime sky, go ahead, make a wish. You may long for home, but you will soon find that home can also be here. We embrace you and everything that you bring, your customs, your food and music, your smiles, your heart. Think not of the veins of this outstretched hand as dead ends, but as living rivers. Before you arrived, we thought we knew who we were, but now we know we are more than we dreamed. Let me feel what you remember, and I will go the way you came. I wait, my extended hand, a poem, replete with petals of love, stems of growth, vines of hope. Would you like to eat lunch with me? Would you like to join my family for Thanksgiving celebration? Sharing a meal is how we nurture relationships, celebrate achievements, mend conflicts, and feel gratitude for life. To the Abuelita on Fifth Avenue, you are the building block of my community and corazon. To my fellow neighbors, share your kindness, share your support, and extend belonging to those who only just arrived. Be the first to provide dignity, safety, and grace in these times of migration, disruption, and hard choices. We all know how it feels to be excluded. We all have the power to help others belong in our communities. From the first day a new resident moves here, they are part of our family. Here, we shelter the poor, remember the forgotten. Every stranger becomes a prospect for friendship. Our tiny planet is but a small swirling speck of cosmic dust with even tinier occupants bumping into each other, seeking shelter, better weather. Kapwa ko, I give you harbor, armor, anchor. Here is where you can start over. Belonging begins with us. ¿Qué onda ya comiste? Vamos a comer a mi casa. Welcome, welcome home. Herete means to rejoice. Shtere mashe, we're glad to have you. Shalom, salam, pas amani, vrid, paco, peace. Thank you for being here. Please ask for anything you need. May each bright dawn bring you peace, bring family and memory, hummingbird, hawk. May the surf be a heartbeat, steady as home. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and thank you to the San Mateo County Office of Services to present our collaborative work on building and belonging.
Yes, thank you, Eileen, for sharing that lovely poem. And what a perfect segue into our next session, the stories behind the numbers. Here with us for this panel are three amazing women that we actually had the pleasure of profiling in our Gateways for Growth research report and on the Gateways for Growth website that Mo and George shared in session 1. I'd like to start by introducing Althea Bichede Guzman, a risk manager at the biotech company Amgen. Over the last 10 years, Althea has devoted efforts to strengthen community resilience through various outreach efforts. Althea joined Amgen in December 2020 as the new risk manager. In her role, she supports the site's emergency and crisis management and overall business resiliency. Welcome, Althea. Next, we have Marian Lee, a partner at Lighthouse Public Affairs. Marian has more than 20 years of professional experience in government. Marian's skills are focused on driving initiatives with integrity. Welcome, Marian. Last but certainly not least, we have Marilu Bedoya Jaimes, an outreach specialist with the County of San Mateo. Marilu is an immigrant from Mexico and joined the Office of Community Affairs in March 2020. In her role, she overlooks development and execution of COVID-19 community response projects and paid media contractors. Welcome, Marilu. We will ask 3 questions to each of the panelists, and each panelist will have approximately 3 minutes to answer each of the questions. So let's start. So the first question, please share a brief insight or your immigrant story as to your experience in settling in San Mateo County. And I'll let anyone that wants to start kick us off.
I can start if that's okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jasmine and Jennifer and the County of San Mateo for hosting this event. I will share my immigrant story and focus on language acquisition. I arrived to the States with my family and settled in San Mateo County when I was just 4 years old. I was not able to be enrolled into preschool and instead was, for my first year of living here, taken care of by my aunt and alongside with my 3-year-old cousin. And my cousin and I together, we would listen to English TV, and that was my first exposure to the English language. And then when my parents arrived from work and picked me up and take me back home, I would practice my Spanish and then be exposed to Spanish media. Very early on, my parents instilled in me the importance of learning English and as well keeping my Spanish and culture alive. And that is a pressure that many immigrants faced, and then it could lead to traumatic experiences in adulthood. And at 4 years old, it's a critical stage period for language acquisition. And when I turned 5 and finally was enrolled into kindergarten, I felt that pressure. And it increased when I noticed that I was behind in my language, in my English development, when I compared myself to my peers. And so my parents relied heavily on the English that my sister and I would learn from school, and often I would feel a little bit guilty if I couldn't translate a wordy paperwork. However, I feel extremely lucky and indebted to my parents for choosing a place like San Mateo County to live in and to raise us in, because they were able to find resources and help from our local community center, North Fair Oaks. And I was able to find resources at school and have great mentors at school. And I was finally able to get up to speed with my peers, and I ended up going to community college and then transferred to UC Santa Barbara, and then go on to work at the National Education Association. And now I'm here working at San Mateo County. So my story is more on the pressure that I felt growing up to learn the language. But I feel like I mastered it. And so now I actually have to go back and learn more of the Spanish grammar. But, you know, the work continues. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn, for sharing that. Just want to do a sound check if you can hear me. Excellent. Before I begin kind of sharing my own insights, I think I would be remiss if I did not give Eileen and everybody who contributed to that poem all the kudos. I'm like still tearing up and so incredibly emotional from it. So I just want to, you know, I know we can't really do it on a webinar, but definitely I think I saw in the chat too, just everybody was feeling that. So Eileen, I just want to say thank you. And even that, you know, I haven't heard something that powerful, you know, since, gosh, just being in San Mateo County. And so my story is a little bit different. I too kind of immigrated from the Philippines to the United States when I was younger. So I was 7 years old, but we moved to Chicago. We immigrated to Chicago. And so my story with my insights to San Mateo County is that I'm a very new resident here. So I just moved in December of 2020, relocated for my new position. And the story that I can share is that what if my family and I had immigrated to San Mateo County? Would I be different, and my family's, you know, experience be different, you know, today? Because in the communities that I grew up in Chicago, I went to Chicago public school. I actually know Spanish better now than my own native language, to the point where I'm teaching my son Spanish as opposed to any dialect of Filipino. And, you know, while I did have my Filipino family and, you know, the little Filipino community, I was mostly exposed to a lot of Latino, Chicano communities. And so I was like, to fit in, I had to learn Spanish instead. And so it was almost like, you know, I'm lucky enough that in the Philippines, and we can talk about systems later in school systems, but in the Philippines, they teach you English in school. That's the written language, that's the English language in in the Philippines. So when I came to America, it was less of a struggle. And so it was almost like fitting in. I needed to learn Spanish instead. So that was my experience growing up, is taking on a different, less of my own Filipino culture in my immigrant community, and finding almost a different immigrant community to feel like I needed to fit in. And so I wonder if we had moved to San Mateo County, and even now I still get so startled when I hear the Filipino language, just like down the street, just walking in the mall, and I just hear people chatting in Filipino, and I turn around, it still catches my ear because I'm just not used to it. I'm not accustomed to seeing it and hearing it. And I remember I was just in, I think, Foster City, and they have this large amphitheater, and my son and I were just going for a walk, and then I noticed they were just doing Filipino line dancing, and I just see this crowd of people just doing Filipino line dancing together, and I was appalled. Honestly, I was honestly appalled because I grew up in Chicago. I went to school in Washington, D.C., so Midwest, East Coast. And then I came back and I lived in the Midwest, the St. Louis area for another 3 years. And so, I've had the Midwest, I've had the East Coast, and now I'm going here in the West Coast now. And in all of that experience, in all of those urban, even metropolitan communities, I had never encountered my own, line dancing apart from a Filipino party that I usually attend. So, for me, that's what I can say in terms of settling in San Mateo County, even for the last 9 months. I have never felt kind of more, now we're talking about belonging begins with us. It's just stirred up some questions for me, like what would have happened if my family had immigrated and settled here in San Mateo County, like Marilou's family, taking advantages of those resources instead of, living in Chicago, where I almost felt like I had to belong to a different community. Right, that's my insight.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I also wanted to give a big applause to the poem and Eileen. I got all choked up as well, so that was really beautiful. So my name's Marion Lee. I go by Mare, and I am from South Korea. So my family and my parents, my older sister and I, when I was 6, we immigrated to Daly City. This was in 1974. I'm in my 50s, so that was a long time ago. We came to the States with just a couple of grand. We didn't have much money. We sold everything in South Korea, and all of our family we left. So we did not have family here, and we came with a promise for a job for my dad, which ended up not working out. And so we sort of landed without any safety network, job, very limited friends, I think. We had friends through family. And we ended up in Daly City in a very low income apartment complex. And it was really my sister and I, we were plopped into the public school system. It was MP Brown. I still remember, really tiny. And my dad and my mom, they were both college graduates, very well educated, but they had to land on jobs, whatever jobs they could find. So my dad ended up working in gardening. He was in gardening service for John's Nursery, which was in Daly City. And then my mom was able to benefit from an ESL program, and they helped her land a clerical job in a Fireman's Fund insurance company. And we lived on really limited resources, and I think with the luck of being able to find jobs and the public school system, and I would also add there was also a Korean church which helped our family with our limited English and sort of needing to find like or kin people. We found them at a Korean church. So I think with that network, that's how we started to kind of get situated in Daly City. And I think I want to highlight that at the time, I am not sure that we were very much aware of what resources may or may not have existed. We had significant language barrier. And so even if there were resources, we weren't knowable about it. And I think what helped us kind of get situated was sort of the poem from the letter from the gentleman from Foster City. It was really individuals and certain individuals that welcomed us and just sort of one by one help us to get assimilated in Daly City. So that's a little bit of my story. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories. It's really impactful and powerful, I think, when, we see, because we just had all this data that was presented to us, and really putting faces to the data, I think is really, really powerful and meaningful. So thank you for sharing your stories. So we can move on to the next question. So we'd like to learn what things along the way in your journey to San Mateo County made you feel like your community was belonging. And were there things that perhaps maybe made you feel unwelcome or that this wasn't your home? And again, I'll let anyone start.
I can start. So in terms of belonging, and like I mentioned, I'm new to San Mateo County, and so I brought my son with me. He's 4, and I'm kind of a single working mom, and we move around a lot, like I mentioned. And in those communities that we've moved around in, I'm still always hyper aware of when I introduce him to a new place, to a new school, a new daycare, a new program, of is he going to feel like he belongs, with the way that he looks? Are there going to be other people that look like him? Do I need to have that conversation with him first of, because I do believe that he is aware, because he's talked about it. He's talked about being the only person that looks like him in the classroom. So that was something that I definitely considered as soon as we moved here, picked up and moved to the Bay Area here in San Mateo County. And when it comes to belonging, I think we have to look at what does belonging really mean, right? Like, so for me, it's intrinsically just linked to safety. Like, I feel safe in a place that I can hear a language that's familiar to me. I can see people that might look like me, or even if people don't look like me, they don't look, they're not surprised to see me, right? Have we all had that experience of, walking into a room and, oh, that's surprising, you look different from me, where that's kind of normal. So when I think about kind of our journey and belonging here, moving to San Mateo County, that was something that I was always hyper aware about. Like, what is the makeup of a group of people that I'm going to introduce my son to? What types of conversations do I need to have to prep him? And I was surprised by, again, this is just like a journey of surprises for me moving to San Mateo County, by the fact that I didn't have to have so many of those conversations that I did in St. Louis, Missouri, and of course, a factor of that is just the demographic makeup in a place. And so, I'm still honestly trying to come to terms with the fact that I don't have to. I feel a better sense of belonging for my son, especially, where he doesn't always have to feel defined and be different. And so that's just kind of in the places that he goes to and the programs that he's enrolled in, throughout San Mateo County. I think that's so important to see that and to hear. I'm just gonna share that bit.
I think for me, and I'm recollecting more back when I was younger, again, this was a while ago, so I know that the county has progressed a lot, but so what I remember to feel welcoming back then in the 1970s in Daly City was what was just mentioned, which is a very large Filipino population in Daly City. And there were lots of people with different backgrounds or ethnicity, but predominantly Filipino. And so being Korean and Filipino is very different, but it's not white. And so from that sense, it felt very welcoming. In some ways, I did feel like a minority because I was like, why aren't I Filipino? Because everybody else is. So it was an interesting dynamic. I do think that the thing that I remember to be most welcoming were individuals that we met more than sort of group environments. And it was the one-on-one relationships that built over time that started to increase a sense of belonging and welcoming. And I would say that was very positive for Daly City and growing up there. I think one of the things that were not welcoming, and this is only in hindsight, is I've thought a lot about programs or things or just visible things that embraces different cultures, you know, like even when you walk into an international airport, you just see signs in different languages. And that alone starts to make you feel welcome because there's just an acknowledgement that your culture exists and that it was meaningful enough that there was something put into your language. And I know those things are also very strong visual cues. I know for my parents, they'll see something in Korean, be like, oh, look, they know it's Korean, there's a Korean sign here. So I think in hindsight, things that may have not felt so welcoming is having things in different cultures that make you feel like it's really something that's embedded in the community and not sort of an afterthought or a special promotional effort, but really integrated. So those are a few of my thoughts.
And for my story, I'm going to travel back to my senior year of high school when I first shared with my peers about my status. This was during our an application process for a senior to senior scholarship award. And so for the application, I was going back and forth on what I should write on. And I decided to share a little bit, sorry, it's a little emotional.
Okay, Mary, we'll take your time. We're all here for you.
I decided to share. I'm sorry, guys, it's just.
No need to be sorry, Marilu.
Yeah, maybe we can come back to this question. Sorry. Okay, I think I got it. I decided to share just because that was the time that the DACA program was just approved. And so then I wrote about it and I was really humbled that my peers chose me for the award. I'm really thankful and humbled, and I hope that my peers continue to be in roles that help support immigrants like myself. And what an ironic place that I am now at. I'm working for County of San Mateo, helping out communities with assisting them to connecting them to services and programs regardless of immigration status. So thank you, county leaders. Thank you for the organizations that help out for making this a wonderful county to live in. And that's all I wanted to share. Sorry about that.
Don't say sorry, Marilu. Thank you for sharing your heart and for being vulnerable with us today. You're going to make all of us tear up, but we'll try to keep it together. And so I just wanted to say thank you, Marilu, and also Marian and Mateo for answering that question with pure honesty. It's really important for our attendees to hear. So again, thank you. And we can move on to the last question that we have. And so to kind of just bring this session together, what methods of support or types of programs can the county, cities, and organizations offer that can help create welcoming communities to ensure all who reside in San Mateo County feel that they belong?
Maybe I'll start this one. There was one theme that I wanted to share, and I'll tie it into the question. So it has been a long time since I immigrated, and being part of this session has really helped me reflect a lot about what it is to be an immigrant. And I think one of the big things that's hit me is I think I spent a lot of my time not thinking about being an immigrant because we were so focused on figuring out how to blend in that I have for many decades forgotten to celebrate being an immigrant. And this venue has really allowed me to reflect a lot and think about that. And, as you're trying to realize the American dream, you figure out the ladders and the Western structure in a way that you have to adapt to it to succeed and to sort of rise. And it's with that context, it was a hard realization because I couldn't answer why I wasn't celebrating my immigration status more as I was growing up and helping other immigrants celebrate their cultures. And so in that context, I think that what our county could do better, and I do love this county. I think it's a very kind county with so much loving heart. It's hard to say what more they could do, but I think there would be two things that I think if people can push for would be very helpful in my eyes. One is it's more of a on the social side or recreational side. But I do think the more we can sort of really celebrate the different cultures, it will become less foreign. And so it's not so foreign to experience a Japanese culture or Filipino culture, whatever it might be. And it might be because there's food tastings that's more diverse. And we do see that. But instead of it being sort of an exceptional event, that it could be more of a day-to-day. And the best example I could use was when my daughter was in elementary school. They regularly had different cultural events. And so by the time my daughter came out of elementary school, she was very familiar with the Indian culture, the Chinese culture, and it was very common to her that nothing that she saw later became a surprise, but it was sort of like, oh, well, we did that in school. And so I would encourage us to do more of that. I think there's no end to how much more we could do that. And then the other recommendation I would have, and it's more in the professional field, is I do think, I do wonder if there's a lot of apprentice programs within different professional industries. And I wonder if there was something like an immigrant apprentice program. Sounds weird, but I think for those with limited English, it's such a huge barrier, and it hides the potential and the capabilities of immigrants who can do so much more, but their abilities get hidden by the language barrier. And I do wonder if there would be programs in the professional environment that might help to train and work with immigrants so that they can really fully realize and rise above the English barrier versus it suppressing their other capabilities and what they could contribute to in our communities.
I would like to add on Marian Lee's suggestions. I have a few, and a strategy that cities and nonprofits can incorporate is hosting their own immigrant spotlight series. Currently, County of San Mateo Immigrant Services host monthly spotlight series with highlighting providers that already are catering to communities regardless of immigration status. So I feel like if cities hone in on the organizations serving their own area, they'll be great, and even more hosting them in languages. Immigrant Services has provided these spotlight series before in English, Chinese, Spanish, and Tagalog. And it would be a wonderful idea for cities to host their own. And then another suggestion for cities, churches, other organization is to host a Civics 101 course or workshops in language so that new immigrants could come and know what type of departments the county has and what purpose they serve. And then my last recommendation would be for cities and organizations to invest in bilingual employees so they can help out when they are providing a service to an individual.
I've been so excited to answer this question. I've mentioned a couple of times, that I've been so surprised since moving here just 9 months ago about feeling welcome. And that surprise is linked to trust, right? Like I don't think I was ever trusting the community that I lived in to make me feel welcome, because I always felt like, an outsider in some way as an immigrant. And so when we think about trust in a community, and we've talked about how that's intrinsically linked to belonging, that trust is also that feeling of familiarity that we talked about, but safety as well. And I speak to this because, my professional career is in emergency and crisis management and public safety in general. So my recommendation to this is really in kind of addressing, we've heard the term a lot, especially as of late, the systemic issues that we have, right? And so the two things that I would say is efforts in critical infrastructure, right? So when I say critical infrastructure, I'm talking about even healthcare and hospitals. When we go into places, public safety, fire, EMS, police, even power, electric, that kind of thing. How accessible are the resources, or even like when we talk about language, right? Like the resources that we have for public safety power shutoff, right? That gets mailed by PG&E. Are those in accessible languages? For example, I was trying to look at the attendee list to see if we had any representation from public safety agencies in San Mateo County, even, representation from either, police, fire, EMS, or even just healthcare and hospitals, because we have to look at the accessibility in those places, because that critical infrastructure is something that immigrants have to interact with. And so I think we really have to look at those places to see, are those places accessible? Do we trust those institutions, those public institutions as well? Do immigrants trust them in those places? And so I think what we fail to realize is maybe we need to formalize connections with each of these different kind of critical infrastructure pieces to make sure that, hey, representation matters. Like, this is something that maybe you wouldn't have considered for the immigrant population that comes into the ER, or, how can, just community policing, for example. So I look at it in that way, in terms of, how do we build trust with the existing kind of critical infrastructure that we have that addresses a lot of those systemic issues of trust in general, because safety is really intrinsically linked to that belonging. So I would just like to look at that quite a bit more. And, in my experience, it was just navigating other systems like the American school system, right? That in itself, Marilu, I see you nodding, like, gosh, what do we offer, especially as immigrant children, whose parents didn't go through the American school system? Like, that in itself, there are so many steps to it, and even just the understanding of, what happens if you take on financial aid, right? What do those student loans mean to you? And so what I just wanted to say is that when we're looking at kind of safety just making sure that we're formalizing our representation of diversity and immigrants and those critical infrastructure pieces that really allows us to maybe more formally address those systemic issues.
Thank you, Althea, Marilu, and Marian. We have quite a few people on the webinar from different areas that can hopefully take this information back. We certainly will, and we'll rewatch the webinar and see, how we can try to improve systems to try to make, San Mateo County has been doing such a great job, and so I think, but like I think Marian said, there's always room to improve, and so thank you for sharing. And we have a few questions. And so the first one is kind of long, but I think it's really important. So it's for Marian. So I'll read it slowly. Marian, thank you so much for sharing that experience regarding signs. For public cultural institutions, what feels most meaningful to start with? Wayfinding signs, learning materials in like interpretive wall signs, maps, website where you purchase tickets. We want to make sure we do this thoughtfully and sometimes feel overwhelmed on where to start. Considering our budget, bandwidth as nonprofits, there can be months between each part.
Yeah, that's a hard one because I would like to, I wanted to say, can you do all of them? Somebody give them money so they could do all of them. I think if I had to prioritize, I'm really thinking about it from my parents' perspective. I think the most effective is anything that is very visible, right? Because it's, when you're walking down the street or you see a building, it's like when you can see that visual cue and it's something in your language, it makes your brain say, oh my God, they know what Korean people are, and it makes them curious as to what that building is and what's in it, which can then get them to go in it, and then maybe there'll be a brochure and there might be a translation in Korean. So I would say if you had to prioritize anything, it would be the one where you have the most foot traffic or eye traffic, and it gives that first impression that you are a multicultural institution or being or setting. And I think the more languages you can have, and even if it's the most basic entry sign, I think I would prioritize that.
Thank you, Marian. Just want to make sure, does Marilu or Althea have anything to add for that?
I definitely agree with Marian. Anything with the highest foot traffic would be the best place to start, or even if you have a business card including se habla, or sorry, this is for Spanish, se habla español, or I speak this language, like this other languages are available. Just having that option there, and maybe even a website, but I know that's time consuming, but yeah, not always resorting to Google Translate, please.
The only thing I wanted to say about that is that it's really reassuring, I think, for any immigrant to see that, multiple languages are listed as options. Of course, we cannot translate every single language, especially with the diversity that we have in San Mateo County, but that already prompts you to think, oh my goodness, like they care about me, they care about these languages and these cultures. Maybe they'll have somebody who can, translate for me. Maybe they'll have resources for me. So, I think it's great to have, at least multiple languages to show that, hey, we're trying. In a wonderful world, I would love it if there was like a single resource that San Mateo County had, whether it's like a phone number, which I think right now is more accessible to immigrants than maybe even a website is, but a phone number that they can call, and then, any language that perhaps they have, they could, somebody can direct them to a translation service to support that kind of thing. I mean, dream world, right? Like a central repository phone number that they could reach. Maybe that exists already.
I do want to hop in, Jen, sorry. I think you all make a great point that language can be that first step of feeling like you belong, that somebody else understands you. I am very excited that Jen and I, a couple of years ago, worked with county leadership to put in place a language access guideline for all county departments. I know that that doesn't hit cities and it doesn't hit schools and organizations, but essentially, you know, somebody who comes into planning and building, or the Parks Department, or Office of Sustainability, or the Board of Supervisors, all departments have access to interpretation services over the phone. And I believe that there's over 150 languages offered by the organization or the vendor that we contract with. And so, especially in the pandemic, we saw those translation and interpretation services skyrocket. So that is available at the county level. And again, we can always do more. But just one thing that we, you know, that was brought up from community advocates and partners and residents telling us this. And so I want to highlight that because the county does listen. So yeah.
Thanks, Jazz. You stole the words right out of my mouth. I was definitely going to talk about the county's language access policy and how we can really like expand upon that because it is only available to county departments, but it's definitely something that I think would be great. Cities and other organizations. Thanks for bringing that up. I do see another question that we have, and it's, I would love to hear if anyone has suggestions specifically for cultural institutions, parks, gardens, and museums.
I think an easy one to do would, going back to what Marianne discussed earlier, having a culture specific night, hosting families and making it open to not only to that specific culture, but welcoming everyone so they can learn a little bit more about, let's say, the Korean culture or Tongan culture. So yeah, that would be a good one to host or in a museum or at a park or yeah, that would be my suggestion.
It's like the mute toggle. You know, the other thing I would add is I think little things make a really big difference. So you know, it's even like elevator music or like, you know, when you're waiting and there's music on, my mom and dad recognizes when it's like Korean music, you know, or like, I know there's other cultural musics, or when you go to like the welcome table, I know there's always knick-knacky or free giveaways to those that visit the museum or whatever. I think if those were in different, if the institution can embrace different cultural gadgets, I call them gadgets or giveaways, I think that's another way. It's like this, it's like really small things that seems to make such a big deal to my parents, and they'll recognize and they'll be like, oh, they like my Korean culture, but it was literally like a $1 gadget on like a welcoming counter. And so I really want to highlight that those little things can make such a huge impact.
I was going to say, you know, leveraging those existing, like each month is dedicated to a different culture. You know, there's always, there's already a lot of like social marketing that's that you can leverage to associate with that. So if you want to use that, like each month we're highlighting a different culture. And then I would also say, you know, what I haven't said before is partner and leverage existing kind of community organizations, nonprofits that are in your area. Like if you're a park, if there's a church nearby, or if you're a museum, you know, highlight even maybe the different community organizations that are nearby, that kind of thing. I think, why don't we partner and collaborate with each other that are doing all the same type of work and kind of highlight each other? So that's something I would say.
Thank you. And I think I don't see any other questions. Jazz, did you see any other questions come through? Okay. So just wanted to say thank you so much to Althea, Marilu, and Marion. You have really taught us a lot today. And you've also shared your stories, which are just like so touching. And it's always, like data, like I think it was Mo who even said it's always so important to put a heartbeat to the data. And I think you've really done that today. And I just really want to say thank you, and we appreciate you for being here with us today. And so we will move on to the last session that we have today. And so here to really wrap up and bring the Belonging Begins With Us message home is our wonderful Chief Equity Officer, Shireen Malakavzali. Shireen joined the County Manager's Office as the county's first ever Chief Equity Officer in April 2021. As Chief Equity Officer, Shireen supports the county to build more equitable structures, policies, practices, and procedures in order to advance equitable outcomes for our communities. As part of her work, she will lead the development of a new Office of Racial and Social Equity. Shireen brings over 20 years of experience advancing equity through the nonprofit, government, and philanthropic sectors. We'd like to welcome Shireen.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I just want to share my deep appreciation for the stories that were shared with us. That is really beautiful, and it takes a lot of strength, resilience, and vulnerability to share stories. So thank you for doing that and really setting the stage for us. I'm going to be sharing my screen so that you can see my PowerPoint. If for any reason you cannot see it, please wave your arms around. I am Shireen Malakavzali. I use the she, her pronouns, and I am the Chief Equity Officer for San Mateo County. It's the brand new role for the county, and I've been in the role for just 5 months now. So I'm in a constant state of learning and growing, and will continue to stay that way. I also am an immigrant to the United States, and so this topic is really near and dear to my heart. I had to learn English and learn the culture and navigate all the different systems. And obviously it was much more difficult for my parents at the time. And for a long time, I was embarrassed and ashamed of being an immigrant and where I came from, given how my culture was portrayed on the news and how narrowly it was really understood by people. When people couldn't say my name, I was just mortified as a child, and they would often say Sharon or Sherry, and I just decided to adopt it to make it easier for myself and really formally assimilate so I would feel less different and feel less othered. And I've since become more confident in myself and my background, and claim my differences and lived experience as a strength, and the strength that it brings me in the work that I do every day. And I hope that you all feel that the differences that you bring, that lived experience, really is one of the beauties and the strength that you bring every day to whatever it is you do. I would like to just start by acknowledging the land that we are on, acknowledging that the land the county is on sits on the land of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, that we wish to pay respects to the ancestors, elders, and the relatives of the Ramaytush community, and by affirming their sovereign rights as First People. The land acknowledgements don't only come in a historic context. It really is about us acknowledging that colonialism is a continuing practice and building our mindfulness around it. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about just generally a broad equity framework, but really bring it closer to belonging, something I don't have usually a lot of time to do, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So really, how do we bring these concepts of equity and belonging together? First, we have to understand what equity means, and the definition I use is that equity is just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. So this idea of reaching their full potential, some people say thrive, some people say be successful, but really, how do we realize the full potential of every person? And to do that, we need to create the conditions. that allow that to happen. And I think that's the work of equity. And it really is different than equality. Equality looks at how giving everyone the same resources, offering the same things. But it doesn't do is acknowledge that we don't all start from the same place, that some of us through generationally have experienced a slower start, more challenging start. And along our life path that there are more barriers in front of us. If you give everyone the same thing, we're not going to be successful. Not everyone can be successful. If we give people can create the conditions that everyone needs, then we get close to equity. We see more success. But ultimately, the goal is to even out the playing field and to remove the barriers and really work together to be able to do that. I usually differentiate between diversity, equity, inclusion, and bring in the concept of belonging because I feel it's so important. And it typically isn't in the language of a lot of our equity efforts. Diversity is just differences in who people are. And equity is the goal of reaching full potential of everyone. Inclusion is a practice to make space for people and ensure people are included. But belonging is going beyond inclusion. It's saying that there's a sense of authentic participation and power and the design or development, that it's not just about being included in my space or the space that the dominant culture may have created, but to really be a welcomed agent in the creation of the space and have distributive power within it. And just to continue to go a little bit deeper into this concept, we recognize that our systems are inequitable. We readily acknowledge that. At the same time, we continue to welcome new and diverse people into this existing systems without asking questions about what's working, what's not, what do the new people need? What are their aspirations? What would they like to change? What needs to change? That requires us to really acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, and to give up some power to allow the wisdom of those that have been excluded to help improve our systems together. So building truly welcoming systems requires co-creation, co-visioning. You see this diagram on the right, you can see how equity, inclusion, and diversity and belonging really might relate to each other, with belonging really being centered around those three concepts. But if you think about this sort of equity and inclusion, but not diversity, then what you get is too many similar experiences and ideas, and therefore simplified points of view at best. And if you consider equity and diversity, then, but not inclusion, the result is cultural assimilation, where people really disengage ultimately the diverse people. And if you have inclusion and diversity, but you don't have equity, then you still have the dominant group making all the decisions and holding all the power. And really belonging is sort of the sweet spot in the middle, where you bring the pieces together, innovation thrives, and the beliefs and values are truly embraced and woven into the concepts and design and solutions that we all identify together. A key sense of belonging has to do with the narrative that you feel either part of or you don't feel you're a part of. And I think this was a theme that I heard with the previous panelists talking about seeing things written in their culture, having things that are emblematic of their culture and experiences be in the day-to-day lives that you see around, that there's something that tells you you do belong, that there is a narrative here where you belong. And when we look at the dominant narrative of San Mateo County, it tells us who belongs and who doesn't. And many people in the Bay Area, and I would say even in the county, don't really understand that 64% of the county are people of color, that we have this large of a majority of large immigrant population, and we have 30,000 LGBTQ plus community members. Over a third of the people here have disabilities. That is not part of the dominant narrative of the county, even though it really should be the narrative of our county, because that's what the numbers show us. So The detailed data on our immigrant population in San Mateo County, that I think it was Amanda that went over, it was so wonderful to hear that, but it's not part of the dominant narrative and woven into the stories that are told oftentimes. And we've been majority people of color for over 2 decades, but our narrative is really slow to shift. And you're starting to see it, but not necessarily. And that message in the day-to-day, whether it's news or how people talk about San Mateo County, it really creates the sense of whether an individual can feel like, or a whole community can feel like they belong or not. And something we have to always be careful about is that to give value to people based on what they do versus their innate and beautiful value and wisdom and love that people bring. So, for example, I know that there was a national strategy for to support immigrants that included really sharing what immigrants do, their careers, their jobs. So immigrants who served in the military were really lifted up, or work as nurses or caregivers, making sure to consider a world where, you know, what if we didn't have that access to that labor, versus a true sense of belonging, that everyone is valued, not just because of what they do for you or what they can bring for you, but because it is truly an innate value that individuals hold themselves. And that's evident in how young people feel. Young people of color, this shows a chart that shows young people of color in our North Fair Oaks, Redwood City area, which we spoke with, felt that they either always, most of the time, or sometimes were discriminated against by really everyone who they came in contact with, from teachers to neighbors to police and coworkers and even healthcare providers. The quote here at the top really, you know, says that teachers didn't support and believe in everyone being the same, and therefore didn't feel like they belonged. And here for LGBTQ plus communities, you can see that over 40% of our LGBTQ plus communities don't feel that most people in the county are accepting of them. That over 90% of LGBTQ plus youth didn't hear positive messages about themselves from leaders, and 80% received negative messages in schools, just the opposite. And so if you're getting the message that you don't belong in the school, in the county, in this place, then that leaves you feeling less than and forgetting the strengths that you could really bring. So what are the conditions that we need to create so all people, especially youth, feel like they belong? One thing we just I want to highlight is just the fact that this sense of belonging is rooted in a concept of inequities, of systems of oppression. So there are root causes for inequities, are these systems of oppression that are listed, just probably not an exhaustive list even, but just that are listed here on the slide that you're looking at, many of which really have been part of the United States since the founding. And then there are a set of policies and practices that I'll share in the next slide that continue to deepen and maintain those inequities. But these systems play out individually, interpersonally between two people, institutionally as one institution, and then across institutions with a system, and then also culturally, which we may not even think about. And they're both explicit, so conscious, and most are implicit or unconscious. So this is when, you know, someone is getting, let's say, support over the phone. They're calling a company, they need support over the phone, and they receive someone who's has an accent, and they just assume that that person doesn't know as much, or that they can be more disrespectful to that person. Institutionally, that could look like, I mean, there's lots of descriptions of this. We have policies where Black people could not access government-backed low-interest loans, and therefore were left out of all the wealth building home ownership had incorporated. Culturally, we consciously and as policy, we forcibly took Native American children away from their families and put them in boarding schools to embed a European Christian cultural norms. and consciously. Black people are often judged for wearing their natural hair as being unprofessional, for example, versus that just being the part of who they are culturally. So the marker of what the standards are set by are often by the dominant white culture and what white looks like or expects. And as I was saying before, these sort of these oppressions are built into the policies, practices of our nation, and they reinforce and maintain these systems of oppression and inequities, either consciously or unconsciously. And you know, these are big concepts. We could talk about these for days and break down what these different systems of oppression. But when we think about power and privilege, when we put it in terms of power and privilege instead of topics of dominant culture or not, there is a sense that the majority of us innately understand, even if we don't fully know and understand the historic concepts of oppression or these different types of policies or practices is not something we're familiar with. Well, we often actually do have a sense of what it means to what power and privilege means. So I just want to take a moment and ask you all to either put it in the chat if you can feel comfortable. I'd love to see it. Who you think might have more power and privilege with among the two populations that I'll mention. So for example, 16-year-olds versus 30-year-olds. Who has more power and privilege in our community? Yes, you see 30-year-olds. Now let's take 40-year-olds versus 80-year-olds. Who has more power and privilege? What about Muslim or Christian in our community? Who has more power and privilege? White or Black? A person with an accent or no accent? Immigrant or native born? Men or women? A person with disabilities or a person without disabilities? Cisgender or transgender? Gay or heterosexual? Okay, this is exactly, people innately understand where power and privilege are held, even without understanding all the policies, practices, and systems of oppression that are out there. And so without that the deeper understanding of those systems and structures, at the same time as you innately see and feel privilege and power, if you're not part of that dominant culture that has the privilege and power, you feel less than, you feel like there's something wrong because these systemic norms and oppressions are not made light and are not taught in our courses and are not front and center around why these power and privileges exist, and at the same time don't enable us to collectively work together to break down that power and privilege and make sure that there is more access to opportunities and more equity. And I just really have to emphasize the fact that when you think about these norms around power and privilege and dominance, what you see is that it's not just one characteristic that defines a person. You have some people have layers of individual characteristics, many of which layer on oppression on top of oppression, or power on top of power. And that can oftentimes be invisible for people who benefit from it. I also want to make sure that we as we look at these layers of oppression, that we recognize the deep community assets that we have, that even as we talk about these layers of oppressions and We have to acknowledge the amazing resilience of our communities, the culture, the arts, the familial connections, the strength of our relationships, the community organizing and more that really has ensured that not only that we survive, but we remain as communities. So, what's really required of us here to advance belonging? And the first thing I will ask is that we sort of look to bring our hearts into this as well as our heads. It's very common for us, particularly professionally, but even personally, we think you're stronger if you're not getting emotional. Whereas really, why crying is a strength. To bring that emotion to bear, that really takes strength and vulnerability. And that the work that we're doing here together is about love. It is about how we show up for each other and the interconnectedness that we feel through the differences. And that in our minds, the mind that we bring, that we don't bring a fixed mindset, that we really look at a growth mindset. How do we show up always humble and ready to learn, recognizing that even when we see someone from our own culture, there are only some things that we may understand about that. And also being very reflective about what it is that I bring, what are the things that I have been told, what is the air that I've been breathing, and sort of being able to elevate into my conscious all these different power and privilege dynamics that I have been taught without actually being taught it by name. And I like this saying that John Powell utilizes, which is be hard on systems and soft on people, because people are a product of those systems and structures. And John Powell, he is at the Center for Othering and Belonging at UC Berkeley, and I'm a huge fan, and I think probably some of an eminent thinker on the concept of belonging. He talks about bridging versus breaking. So what can we do? We can bridge. There's a lot of anxiety out in the world right now. Our bodies are typically not used to processing so much information. We used to know about issues in our family, in our immediate clan or community, and maybe the town over. Then it was our cities and then regional news. But now, we get news literally from everywhere all the time, and that could really overwhelm our emotional and our cognitive systems. We also are experiencing a lot of change. There's enormous demographic changes in the United States. There are climate change issues, there are economic volatilities, globalization, really a division between incomes also. COVID, there's just a lot of fear out there and anxieties around change. And John Powell talks about how we react to these anxieties and change either by breaking or bridging. And breaking is really the concept of hunkering down with people that look and think like you, and pushing away people that aren't like you, othering them and blaming them for the challenges that you're facing. Bridging is really seeing the strength and the diversity and coming together to build a better future that's more resilient and able to overcome the challenges ahead. And he talks about the concept I really love, the concept of targeted universalism, the idea that if we can plan for centering those most impacted, that's the targeting, and ensuring universal benefits. So an example of that is that curb cuts. This was developed by centering those with disabilities, but everyone benefits from it for the most part. You have parents with strollers who feel more comfortable going down a curb. All of us trip less often when we're walking and talking on the phone. We almost always, most of us try to find the curb cut as we go across the sidewalk as well. So we all really benefit from it. I'm going to attempt to show a video on my screen, and I hope you can bear with me. And if it doesn't work, it's not a problem. It really just gives me the chance to have you hear directly a 2-minute video of John Powell describing this concept, which he does much better than I do. If maybe Jennifer or Jasmine, if you could give me a thumbs up if you can hear it and see it well, that would be helpful.
Of all the forces shaping politics and culture around the world, perhaps none are more important than our sense of who we are and who we are becoming. We are in a period of accelerated change in at least 4 areas: globalization, technology, the environment, and demographic change. We can only process so much change in a short period of time without experiencing anxiety, which is a normal biological reaction. But how we respond to this anxiety is social. Our response is greatly shaped by the stories presented by leadership and through culture. These stories speak to our deepest values and our core beliefs about who we are, many of which operate at the subconscious level. We can respond to these changes either as a threat or as an opportunity. The first response is breaking. The second is bridging. Breaking can create a deep fear of other groups, making it easier to accept false stories of us versus them. Breaking perpetuates isolation, hardens racism, and builds oppressive systems, while driving our politics and institutions toward anti-democratic and inhumane practices. The other response is bridging, which calls on us to imagine a larger, more inclusive we. When we bridge, we see demographic change and our diverse identities as positive and enhancing who we are. Bridging calls on us to engage in healthy dialogue, requires us to listen deeply. Bridging does not mean abandoning your identity. Bridging means acknowledging our shared humanity, rejecting that there is a them, and moving toward a future where there is instead a new us. But when we bridge, we not only open up to others, we also open up to changes within ourselves, where we can participate in creating a society built on belonging.
I'm glad that worked. I always find it very powerful. And I want to just say that, end by saying that we we have a lot of work to do, and the idea of having a growth mindset and opening our hearts to the concepts and bridging so that we can collectively co-create and build collective power to create a more tolerant, powerful, vibrant future for not just immigrants, but for all of us. I truly believe that this is not a zero-sum game, but the more that all of us feel we belong, the better off all of us are. And I, again, want to thank you for the time and all the support every single one of you offer to immigrant populations. I'm a huge beneficiary of that inclusion of immigrants in the United States, and know that without that level of tolerance, luck, opportunity, hard work, and support, that I wouldn't be here with you today. So deep appreciation for the summit and everything that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Shireen, for the very insightful presentation. It's always a pleasure to hear you speak because you speak with such compassion, and I always learn something new, and I'm sure our audience feels the same way. That power and privilege slide particularly was very captivating. Thank you for engaging us in that exercise and just having us really deeply think about all the inequities that exist. And thank you again for being here with us. We know you're so busy, and so we appreciate your time. And so we will take any questions if there are any. Would you please put the link to the video in the chat, Shireen, when you get a chance? Oh, perfect. I just saw you did that. And so I don't see any questions, but lots of kudos and praise. Jazz, did I miss anything? Okay. As a parting note, if any organization, okay. Not a question, just a comment. Okay, well, thank you, Shireen. And so with that, another thank you to all the presenters and panelists today: Mo, George, Eileen, Althea, Marian, and Marilu. We'd also like to acknowledge you all, the audience members, that took time out of your schedules to join us today for such an important topic, and we hope you found the information impactful and useful. Again, this video is being recorded. There might have been some slight mishaps, so please, when you get the video, if it seems off, bear with us, please. But we tried our best, and so that it will be available after to revisit and share.
And before we end, we'd like to close with this short video to kind of bring us home.
If I could be you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's mind.
Oh, I think we lost the sound, Jazz.
You'd be surprised to see that you've been blind. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Yeah, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
And so that's just one of the materials that Welcoming America has provided partners to share with communities to create a more genuine sense of belonging and welcoming. But we also want to mention again that we have been hosting a slew of events for Welcoming Week, and one of our last ones is scheduled for this Saturday, September 18th, co-hosted with the San Mateo County Parks Department. We will be having a movie in the park at Flood Park in Menlo Park, and we'll be showing Minari, which is a touching story about what roots us. You can RSVP. I will drop in the link below. But again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope that you learned as much as we did, and we'll share this with your networks and coworkers and colleagues. So thank you all so much, and we will see you again next time.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your week.